Hello, my name is George Cairns, and in this video lesson we're going to look at the marquee tools up here and the lasso tools in this box of the tools compartment, and we're going to combine them together to tackle a variety of selection challenges. Now here we have some nice clean lines, circles and rectangles, but we can't really use the rectangular marquee because of the angle that the photograph is taken at. And we've also got a rather squashed circle because we're shooting the sign from below, but we can end up with a shot like this if we use these tools together and modify them to create a perfect circle and a rectangle that's got lines that are perpendicular and parallel with the edge of the frame. But let's kick off with our start image, which is lassobefore.jpg, and we're going to go to this tool here, which is the elliptical marquee, and we'll make sure that the feather is set to 0. And that will give us a nice sharp edge to our selection marquee, which suits the sharp edge of our circular sign. Now before I move on, I'm going to set style from fixed ratio to the default normal so I can actually squash the ellipse as I'm drawing it rather than having a perfect circle, which you can get if you do set the fixed ratio to 1:1. So make sure that's on normal, and then alt click in the middle of the sign as best as you can find it, and then start to draw outwards, and you can see that we can draw a squashed ellipse that suits the shape of my sign. I'm not quite in the circle center there, so it's not quite right, but we can then let go of the mouse button and then let go of the Alt key and drag inside to reposition the elliptical marquee to get it in roughly the right place. But again, you're not really going to get it perfect first time, so you can transform it by going to Select, Transform Selection, and this enables us to transform the elliptical marquee without changing any of the pixels inside it at this stage. You can even rotate it slightly by dragging outside and then drag the corner handles and just get it to be right at the edge of our sign without showing any of the background. So something like that should do the trick, making sure that none of the background is visible. I can use the arrow keys just to fine tune the position as well. I can squash that in a little bit, and then when I'm happy with the transformation I can then hit return to apply that, and then again I can use the arrow keys to fine tune things just to make sure it's not overlapping the edge. So there we have a squashed ellipse that's been rotated slightly to fit the angle of the circles in the shot. So here we have the circular section selected. Let's go now to another tool. You could try and use the rectangular marquee tool if the shot was at the right angle, but because it's not, you have to go to another straight line drawing tool like the polygonal lasso, click Add to Selection in the options bar, keep feather to 0, and then we can click to place points in the corner here to select this horizontal bar and add it to our selection. So we click here, place the last point on the first, you'll see a little circle appears when it's ready to do that, and that completes the selection marquee. We've now got a selection of the horizontal bar and the circular shape, and if we press Command or Control J to float that to a new window, I'll just get the layers palette up so you can see what we've got. There you go, there's the copy now, and there's the original, which we can hide to see the isolated sign on the top layer. We can now transform the sign to make it look like it's been viewed from front on. Before I do that though, I'm just going to go to the zoom tool by pressing Z, right clicking and choosing fit on screen to see the entire document, and then if I press Command R I can get the rulers up. I can then drag horizontal lines from the rulers just to get the parallel lines for the underground sign roughly in position, and I can do vertical lines from the edge here as well just to help me transform those horizontal and vertical lines to make them fit the edge of the frame. So let's go to Command T or Control T to get the free transform tools, and we can then click and drag to create a more circular looking sign. We can drag outside to rotate it until it's in a position like this, and I'm using those guidelines now like so. Hit return again, and that's looking a little bit better. I can drag these lines out at the edge there by moving on them with the move tool. Click, you can see a little icon appears, pop that out to the edge there, pop this one out to the other side, and let's just make sure we've got a horizontal one looking about right. So I can then either Command T again, rotate it a wee bit more just to help straighten things out. I can also hold down the Command key, and that lets me stretch things independently of each other just to try and get the edges of the sign looking okay. I'm going to hide the layers palette for the moment, just bring this one up to the right slightly, and that's helping me tweak these vertical lines here just to make them match the horizontal and vertical lines that I need them to match. Hit return when you're happy, and if you go down to view and untick the extras, that hides the guides, and you can see the modified sign from an angle like so. Now we free transform the squashed ellipse to make it look like a perfect circle, but to double check that, what we can do is click on the elliptical marquee again, and this time set the style to fixed ratio 1 to 1 will give us a circle. If we alt click in the middle there, we can draw an absolute perfect circle. Something like that should do the trick. Drag it into position, and then you can see that my ellipse isn't quite a perfect circle. It's slightly too tall. So what I'm going to do is create a guide so I can transform the circle perfectly by creating a new layer, and then I'm going to stroke that circle with a color. So we click here, and if we choose a nice blue like the guide color that we had, then I can stroke that with 8 pixels. Press Command D to deselect that, and now we've got a perfect circle on this top layer. I can go back to this layer here. I'm just going to Command minus to zoom out. Command T for the free transform tool. I can now squash my circle to fit the guideline that I created using the elliptical marquee, and I now know I've got a perfectly circular underground sign. Hit return to apply the change. I can turn this top layer off now. We don't need the guide anymore, and there is our modified and transformed sign. So let's finish cutting a hole in our sign to lose the rest of the background, and to do that I'm going to go to the elliptical marquee. I'm going to go to this one here, which is a new selection, and then if I alt click to start drawing from the central point again, I can hold shift to constrain it to a perfect circle, because I know it's a circular shape now, and something like that should do the trick. I can then use the arrow keys just to fine tune the position. Maybe I need to increase the size slightly, so let's go to select, transform selection, shift click to constrain it to a circle still, and take it up slightly, hit return, use the arrow keys, and there you go. That looks like we've got all of that central section selected now. So what I can do is then add to this with the rectangular marquee this time. We're going to subtract from the selection just to take out this middle section here, because we don't want to lose the underground bar, like that. Make sure you overlap all of the edges of the elliptical marquee, and there you have it. You can now hit the backspace to delete the rest of the unwanted background. Command D to deselect. So the elliptical and the rectangular marquee tools, and indeed the polygon lasso, are good at selecting things with straight lines or with perfect curves. But if you've got something more organic like this shot here, then we can use the magnetic lasso to cling to the outline of these curved complex shapes and combine them together to create a new background like so. But kick off by opening this one here, which is Magnetic before 02 and Magnetic before 01, and I'll show you how to use the magnetic lasso to isolate the girl from her background very quickly and simply, with a little help also from layer masks, of course. If you click and hold down the mouse button here, you can find the magnetic lasso, or press Shift and L to cycle through the 3 different lasso tools. Keep feather set to 0, and always leave anti-alias ticked for a nice smooth edge to your selection. Now these options here help us to select the edge of the person we want to select by keeping width fairly low to stop the tool from straying too far from her outline, and if there's not much contrast you can increase the contrast value, but here we've got lots of contrasting pixels, so we can leave that on a low value of 20. Frequency refers to the amount of anchor points that the tool produces as you move around the edge, so if it's really complicated you might want a higher frequency, but to keep it nice and clean I'm leaving that down at 25. Command plus lets me zoom in for a closer look, and then I can click to place my first anchor point, and from then on as I move around the outline of the girl it's placing the anchor points automatically to help anchor the marquee around the edge of the girl. Spacebar helps me reposition things, and I can carry on just moving around the edge, and it's adding these anchor points automatically. If it gets lost and you make a mistake, for example like this, move over the unwanted anchor point, hit backspace, and it disappears. You can then take the marquee back to where it should be and then carry on moving around, and you'll get a perfect selection marquee. You can click to place points manually if it does get a little bit lost, but most of the time it's going to do a pretty good job of spotting the edge of the girl and the background there. As we move around the shoe like so, what I'm going to do here is Command minus just to zoom out a little bit. When you get to around about here, if you hold down the Alt key and click and hold down the mouse button, you can change the magnetic lasso to the freehand lasso and click and draw around the edge of the frame very quickly until you get to around about here. Let go of the Alt key and then it goes back to the magnetic lasso tool again, and you can click the last point on the first to complete the selection. And once that's done and you've got your marquee, then double click here to unlock the background layer like so, and then you can pop up to layer, go to layer mask and choose hide selection, and that gets rid of the unwanted background. You can then pop to magnetic before 02 and press Command A to select all, Command C to copy it, and let's pop back to our start image here and Command V to paste it in as a new layer which we can drag below our main layer like so. Then click on the girls layer to target it. You can see there's a little chain icon, so the layer mask is locked there to it. And if you press Command T, you can get the free transform tool. You can then click and drag to rotate the girl so that her terrain suits the terrain in the background there. You've got a nice diagonal line there, like so. Hit return when you've applied that change, and then what we can do is grab the brush tool, which is this one here. Choose a nice black brush from the foreground colour, a nice large brush tip as well, and then if we click on the mask and spray the black brush over there, you can see that we're spraying and hiding details. I've set the opacity to 35%, so the black is actually grey to start with, and that gives you a semi-transparent blend, which gives you more control over how you blend the foreground rocks with the background rocks on the other layer, and you can then fine-tune things like so. I finished spraying the brush tip around the edge of the mask to blend the background and the foreground together. I've also added a curves adjustment layer, and if you just have a quick look at that, I've used the strong contrast preset to create a more dramatic contrast for my shot. I've also filled a new layer with grey, and then I've gone to the lens correction command and added a vignette to then vignette the corners and change the blending mode to overlay to create a more dramatic and moody edge to the frame. And finally, a black and white adjustment layer gives you nice muted colours and gives you a kind of Hollywood graded look to the photograph, especially when you take this down to about 60% to let some of the original colour bleed through. And that also helps the colours from the foreground and background image blend more effectively together. So there's the end result, all thanks to our magnetic lasso tool.